It's championship time. North American Dipcon, Championnat Francais, Diplomacy Winks. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, April 2022. For our feature story, for almost as long as the diplomacy hobby has existed, fans have created and played their own variants from the standard game. History buffs designed map variants using diplomacy to explore the ancient Mediterranean or the Napoleonic period or the warring states of China, while sci-fi or fantasy enthusiasts play on diplomacy maps of Middle-earth or Arrakis as part of their fandom. Game theorists alter the rules of the game to provide new experiences for diplomacy hobbyists. Later in the program, we'll talk about the current world of diplomacy variants with a panel of diplomacy fans experienced in that field. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. For our top story, the 2022 North American Diplomacy Championships, what we call Dipcon, is right around the corner. San Jose, California hosts this year's event April 29th through May the 1st. For a sneak peek of what you can expect, whether you attend in person or plan to watch the DBN coverage live right here on this channel, let's talk to the reigning Dipcon champ and this year's tournament director, Adam Silverman. Hello, Adam, and welcome to Deadline again.
Hi, David. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Remind our viewers where you are and what you do when you're not playing diplomacy.
Yeah, I am. I'm in my backyard right now while I'm on the deck. I live in the Bay Area, Mid-Peninsula, sort of midway between San Francisco and San Jose. And what am I doing when I'm not playing diplomacy? Not a lot. No, I I do have a day job. I work in biotech.
Well, you mentioned San Jose, and I feel like there's something happening in San Jose really quickly here.
Yeah, what could that be? Oh, I know. In actually just under 3 weeks, we're going to kick off Dipcon 2020, North American Diplomacy Convention Championships, which will be part of the whipping tournament, which has been a Bay Area staple since 2004, I think, is when we ran the first one.
Yeah, that's great. To tell us a little bit about how the tournament is structured and what days we're talking about.
Yeah, so the tournament is the weekend of April 29th to May 1st. There's going to be 4 rounds of diplomacy, Friday evening, 2 rounds on Saturday, and 1 round on Sunday. And the first 3 rounds are all untimed. And the Sunday round, just due to time constraints and people needing to get out of there and fly home, will be a timed round. And you can play as few or as many rounds as you want. And of course, playing more will help you win. Your score is going to be the total of your best 3 rounds. So if you do play all 4 rounds, you will get to drop 1. So that's always a bonus for playing everything. We're going to use the ManorCon scoring system, which is sort of a center lead based system. It's been used in a lot of tournaments. It's sort of related to an old popular one called Sum of Squares, but fixes some of the sort of discrepancies around very small powers getting, really low scores. Gives you some opportunities, even as a small power, to get a decent result.
So the tournament, of course, is the North American Diplomacy Championships, and I think you're the reigning champ. How do you feel like giving up your title after only having it for about 5 months?
Oh, that's okay. It's always great to see these things perpetuating, and I think for me, it was great experience back at Carnage for that to be the sort of inaugural event after COVID, and it was just great to go in there and have a great time. Of course, great result. So that's something that will stick with me throughout my whole playing career in life, I guess.
Of course. Well, if someone wanted to be a last-minute registrant, is that okay at this point?
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, it's an all-comers tournament. I mean, we'll have some long-time players there. We're also will have some, I don't know about first-time players, but probably first-time tournament players for sure we'll have there. It's going to be all levels of experience. It's just a fun time to come and meet like-minded people, hang out. If you get eliminated, there'll be other people who are eliminated playing other games, kibitzing. It's just a really fun time. So, last-minute registration is great. Show up at the door. We'll have you. It's good. It's going to be a good time.
And there'll be a link in the show notes below that people can use to get more information about whipping or signing up for this actual Dipcon here at Whipping.
Great.
Adam, thanks for being on the show. As you know, DBN will be there live on the floor with coverage from the tournament floor as well as from the studio, and we're looking forward. I'm looking forward to seeing you personally again, and I know that we're all looking forward to showing those that can't come the experience that you can get through the DBN coverage.
Thanks, David. Always a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Adam. You got it. For the second year, the French language hobby held its virtual championship back in March. Steve Personini edged Ruben Sanchez for the title, besting a field of 22 players and 7 boards played overall. You'll also recognize some of the other names in the French language top 7 from other recent tournament and league action. Christophe Borgia, Lee Sarlainen, Luc Borgia, Remy Hochlander, and Nicolas Sahuguet. Parlez-vous français? If so, you can join in other scheduled tournaments as well as the French Language League, which we sometimes cover on DBN League Night, by following the link provided below. I'm pleased to report that the North American Dipcon is not the only face-to-face tournament coming up. There is a plethora of events now on the 2022 calendar, starting with Australia's PoppyCon, which takes place in Melbourne, April 23rd and 24th, which is the weekend right before Dipcon. And then in May, we have the 36th annual DixieCon in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Memorial Day weekend, followed by the return of Denver, Colorado's Regatta Tournament, June 17th through 19th. On July 9th and 10th, there is the rescheduled face-to-face event in Vancouver, British Columbia called Cascadia. And then the Boston Massacre has now settled on August 12th through 14th for its 2022 face-to-face event. And that's just the face-to-face events. Plans are also underfoot for the return of the virtual Summer Classic, as well as potentially another virtual event in early October. For more information on these and other wonderful opportunities to play diplomacy in the near future, take a look at the Discord server and website links found in the description field below this broadcast. At the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers Conference on Games, held in Copenhagen in August 2021, Frederick Reber at UC Irvine School of Information and Computer Sciences presented a paper entitled Major Developments in the Evolution of Tabletop Game Design. His thesis that only a handful of board games in history have introduced truly original design concepts into the gaming field. He describes 8 games out of the over 125,000 games listed on the Board Game Geek website and the innovations found in each of those 8. And yes, you guessed it, our diplomacy made the list, along with Tactics, Cosmic Encounter, Magic the Gathering, Catan, Dominion, Pandemic, and Pandemic Legacy. For diplomacy, his list of important innovations include simultaneous revealing of moves, the abstracted rules for military conflict resolution, the use of negotiation as a primary player mechanic, and the concept of a politics-based game overall. To read this fascinating article for yourself, follow the link provided below. Now, let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content providers we call DBN Media Partners. The legendary Tactics YouTube channel released another diplomacy-themed video recently, this one being about how to play our game using one of the most recent platforms available, the Diplicity website and Android app. Australians Amby and Kaner, whom you will see later in this broadcast during the panel discussion, just released another episode of their popular Diplomacy Games podcast. This one including an interview with WebDip's Kestis about the current state of that diplomacy platform and its partnership with Meta's AI team. And if you happen not to watch the extremely exciting and path-breaking coverage of this year's final board of the Diplomacy Winks competition, then, well, you've got to see it to believe it. Check out this April 1st release on the DiploStrats YouTube channel and start working on your own flick rate. Links to all these recent releases can be found below, with links to our media partners available also at the NADF.org. Issue 157 of the hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World, was just released in early April. It is chock full of diplomacy content. DBN Invitational finalist Saren Kwok shares her after-action report from that top board, with Peter McNamara providing insights regarding his failed attempt to get back to that top board and repeat as DBNI champion. Eber Condrel describes the various forms of league play now available on the Nexus League server, while Malarkey announces the 4th online diplomacy championship, which he's running on the Play Diplomacy platform. There are also pieces on hobby history, variants, and upcoming face-to-face diplomacy tournaments. Check out this latest effort from editor Doug Kent at the link provided in the show notes below. Now, you didn't think we'd get through this edition of Deadline without mentioning virtual face-to-face league play, now did you? The Tour of Britain kicked off its 2022 season with a game day on March 27th, but we'll feature those games on an upcoming episode of League Night soon here on DBN, so mum's the word on what happened in those games. Shh. The tour continues on May 14th and is open to all comers. For those who have not tried virtual, it is normal diplomacy played live using the Backstabber website and then with audio negotiations through the VWDC Discord server. So in addition to the Tour of Britain, the Virtual Diplomacy League has already held 2 weekends of monthly play as well, with the next one coming up on May 21st. It is not too late to join either of these virtual leagues, so check them out by joining the VWDC Discord server. There's a link to that below. One way to see what this is all about is to watch the latest episode of League Night here on DBN, which featured games from the Nexus Speedboat League, as well as from the April 2nd VDL games. There is also a full explanation early in the episode about upcoming league and tournament events on that broadcast. So I've included a link to that League Night below for your viewing pleasure. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey, and then we'll talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to Tanya Gill of Ontario about her diplomacy journey, as well as other journeys she has made and will make. Tanya, welcome back to Deadline.
Thanks for having me, David.
You got it. Could you tell our audience a little about where you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Canada. I live near Toronto at the moment, and I'm just a lawyer. I just started working about a year and a half ago or something like that. So that's what I do. Quite fresh, quite new, unlike you, David.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that, but anyway, when and how did you first get into our great game of diplomacy?
Yeah, so I've been playing diplomacy since about, I want to say 2015 is when I started playing. And I started playing online. And actually, the way I got into it was I used to do competitive debate in my undergraduate. And someone in my debate club sort of pitched an idea for bonding. Said, hey, this is a website called Web Diplomacy. Do you guys want to play a game? I've been playing this game for a couple of years now. It's pretty popular in the sort of in the debate scene. So I said, all right, yeah, why not? I like games. I get onto Web Diplomacy. I look at the map and I'm like, what did I sign up for? This is awful. But within about like 2 to 3 turns of the game, I was hooked. I'd already signed up for 2 more games after that. And then the rest is sort of history on that end.
Here is something you and I have that's directly in common. That is exactly the group of people that I started playing with, my high school debate team. We were actually the primary people that started learning the game together, probably because of the talking part.
Yeah, I feel like people who like to debate, like to play diplomacy. I think there's a definite correlation there. But hey, maybe, David, that's where we need to start doing more advertising.
It's a possibility. In 1990, just to prove to you how old I really am, the person that won my tournament in 1990, won the World Championships, was a intercollegiate debater that I debated against when I was at Chapel Hill as a debater. I mean, that's how I knew him. So there's a long connection. All right. Well, let's talk about how you got into face to face, because I think that's the first time I heard about you was when you went to the World Dipcon in England and placed, pretty highly as far as I first saw your name. So what caused you to jump into the face to face world?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I started playing on web diplomacy. Initially started with my friends, then got super hooked. The rest of them actually weren't hooked at all. So I was kind of the only one who really latched on to it. And then I started playing online on web diplomacy, and I started getting really involved in the community, and I started becoming friends with a lot of the web diplomacy players. And then someone had advertised, I'm not sure exactly who it was, but someone on the forum of web diplomacy had advertised the World Diplomacy Championships in Oxford. And I knew people from web diplomacy that were going. So names that you also know. So Michalis and Marcus were two of the people I knew from the website who said they were going to this tournament in Oxford that sounded pretty fun to me. Where you don't play it across the screen and you actually play on a physical board, revolutionary concept at the time. So I thought, hey, I kind of want to do a traveling trip to Europe. Why not stop at Oxford on my way to this trip and check out, what face-to-face is all about?
And you've been coming to face to face tournaments ever since.
That's right. Yeah. So I was after that, people were very welcoming, very open. I remember at that tournament, I ended up doing pretty well, which also helps. And I remember at the end of it, Dave Miletsky saying, "Hey, I'm running a tournament in Vermont. A couple months later, if you're interested." And I was like, I think I am. And then I ended up going to Vermont a few months after that.
What do you find compelling about playing diplomacy face to face?
I think, David, it is the best way, in my opinion, to play diplomacy. I think there's a couple things for that. You're in the moment, you're in the zone, you're interacting with people face to face. Like it's just kind of a whirlwind when you first start playing. It's sort of everything that I like in terms of a game, in terms of strategy, in terms of being able to convince people to work with me, to then having a good alliance, all of that. Diplomacy sort of has all of those elements that I'm looking for. And then specifically, in terms of tournaments, um, you get to meet all these really cool people from all over the world, like different ages, different backgrounds, people you would never interact with other than in this hobby. So that's a big, big factor as to why, diplomacy itself is so appealing. That was a bit of a ramble.
No, I love the answer. And I could not agree more with that last part about meeting different people. And that's particularly true nowadays. So when I started, it was a lot more of people like me. And now and I'm happy to say that it has become a much more diverse place, not just in the sort of traditional way, but in all sorts of ways. You get people come from the gaming hobby, you get people that come from debate, you get people come from it's just a great mixture of people. And as you say, how else would Tanya Gill and David Hood have met except through something like this? Seriously.
Right, exactly. It was, I think, and it's also been changing a lot in the last few years, I would say, because when I went to Oxford, I remember first stepping into the room where everyone's hanging out before the game starts, before board call, and I was the only woman in the room. And
Right.
I was like, what have I just gotten myself into? What is this? As soon as the game started, I very quickly forgot about that fact. But, initially you're just like, I thought there would be at least maybe one other. There weren't any. But I feel like now we have a lot, it's not proportionate in any way, but there's a lot more women coming out to these events. So that's always nice to see.
It's really great. Well, you talked about traveling to Oxford for World Dipcon, and I know that travel is something you're interested in outside of diplomacy. So I want to talk to you just a minute about that. Where all have you been, and why do you go there?
So it's funny actually, because I was thinking about this, and my first tournament was Oxford in 2017. And the first time I ever traveled on my own for an extended period of time was right after that tournament. So that was a pretty life-changing experience for me. So I like to do, long-term solo travel to the extent that my schedule allows me to do so. I've done trips in Eastern Europe, sort of in Central Europe, Southeast Asia, and then around the Eurasia continent, and few odd countries here and there. And it's kind of a fun thing. And I think there are some parallels to diplomacy, if I'm going to pull something out of a hat here, where when you travel alone, you get to meet cool people, you get to sort of interact with people you would never interact with otherwise, all over the world. And it's sort of kind of like playing a game of diplomacy, right? You have to figure people out and have to figure out like how to get them to like you. Sort of same thing.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. Is there a particular trip or a particular part of a trip you've taken that really stands out in your mind?
It's hard to say. I think there have been I've had really cool experiences doing things. I volunteered at this Buddhist center in Myanmar for a week, where I got to just volunteer with patients who were terminally ill and sort of hang out with monks. Those were really cool experiences. I think right now the trip that's really been coming into my mind has been my Ukraine trip. So I did manage to get to Ukraine back actually in 2017, right after Oxford. On that trip, I had gone to Ukraine, and it's just such a lovely country with really interesting people and gorgeous architecture. And right now you really think like, wow. Yeah.
I can understand how that could be a little surreal now to think about places you've been. And well, let's talk about something else that's heavy. I think you're planning an extended trip that you're going to leave on soon.
That's right. I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a camera issue here.
No, it's all right. Your camera is traveling. You said. So that's part of the theme that we're doing.
Let's hope it stays. Okay. Yeah. So actually, funny enough, I've just become a new lawyer. So what's the best thing to do other than immediately quit the profession and travel for a year? So starting this summer, I do plan on sort of quitting my job, taking my backpack, and then just starting in South America and going for 6 months, and then going for 6 months somewhere else. And I'm hoping to sort of travel for a year and see where life takes me.
Well, that's kind of exciting, isn't it?
I think so. I hope so.
Well,
I want to try and get a diplomacy tournament or two in there, but not much in South America, unfortunately.
No, we're still waiting on that to take off, and I hope that it will at some point. Well, let's talk just a little bit more about diplomacy. I want to thank you, first of all, because you have been serving on the board of the North American Diplomacy Federation for the last couple of years. Tell us a little bit about what the NADF does, if you would.
Yeah, so the NADF is the sort of North American diplomacy federation. It's the group that tries to keep some kind of semblance and organization to the diplomacy circuit in North America. We have a Discord, so if anyone who is listening to this isn't part of the Discord, please join the Discord. And we also have a website, so the NADF.org. And essentially what the NADF does is we don't run tournaments, but we help the tournament directors in terms of scheduling, in terms of organization, in terms of just making sure that, we have tournaments running and whatnot. We also enforce the code of conduct. So if you are attending a tournament in North America that is NADF sanctioned, or interacting with players that are part of the NADF circuit, and anything happens, then the board will make sure that you're not feeling attacked or harassed in any way. So if there's any issues with that, you could always report it to someone on the board. So we just sort of make sure that things are running smoothly and that we all get along, and that there are tournaments that can be attended.
I got you. How important do you think it is for diplomacy fans to do sort of what you're doing, contribute to the growth and the strength of the hobby itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think that, we're not the biggest hobby. We're quite, we're growing, but of course, there's still so many of us that can only do so much. And, you want to have a hobby where people don't feel overburdened. So not it's hard to do things like run tournaments and organize stuff and have to like enforce a code of conduct. So the burden needs to be shared, or people will burn out really quickly. So I think that if people are interested in helping out in any way, it can be something as simple as GMing a game for the VDL. It doesn't have to be anything major. But if people are interested, they should definitely step up, see what they can do, see how they can help. It doesn't have to be a ginormous task as like running a tournament, but it's a good way to get involved and a good way to get to know people that are running things.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, like you could write an article for Diplomacy World. You could help. Some of our content creators are always asking for help in editing and contribution. So there's all sorts of things that Diplomacy fans can do to get involved if they want to, and we want them to.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts for our deadline audience today, Tanya?
Yeah, listen, if you guys are watching this and you haven't gotten involved in the face-to-face hobby, I deeply and very much encourage you to do so. The people in this hobby are brilliant and fun and interesting and like to, play board games and get drunk and all those things that you also probably like to do. So you should definitely reach out to, any of us. And if you are interested, come join us.
Yeah, by the time we get to this part of the show, the audience will have seen Adam Silverman talking about the whipping tournament coming up here in a few weeks in San Jose. That's one example of something that folks could do to get involved in the face-to-face hobby.
Absolutely. If you can in any way run anything, just come out to them. That also helps a lot to get the interest going.
It's really true. Tanya, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
And now for this episode's panel discussion. Variant enthusiasts have been an integral part of the world of diplomacy since the hobby formed in the 1960s. Postal zines during that time period ran both classic and variant games, and game results from both types were officially memorialized in the hobby records of the time. The hobby's move to the internet caused an explosion in variant play, as it became so much easier to design new variants and to play them online with other variant aficionados. Most major diplomacy websites and apps feature multiple variant offerings, both of the rule variant and map variant types. Here to discuss the current state of the variant sub-hobby are Amby and Kaner from Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, hosts of the Diplomacy Games podcast. And joining them is Ben Durfee of Georgia, the current variant editor for the hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World. All right, Amby, let me start with you. Give us a brief history of how you got into diplomacy and then how you got into variants in particular.
David, first off, thank you very much for having us on the show. It's great to be here. The short answer is my journey actually began with variants. So the first time I played anything which was a diplomacy actual variant, like an official Avalon Hill version of Machiavelli. So I played that when I was at university, I think in my second or third year. Played that a few times. Never actually played the proper, classic game until I'd say probably back in about 2007 or so, and happened to know that this original, Machiavelli version was part of a broader thing called diplomacy. Came across it bizarrely on Facebook. So someone had kind of created a Facebook version of diplomacy, but you were playing against people that would go into civil disorder all the time because they just didn't really care. So as a result of all that stuff, found WebDip and then, VDip, or what was it called, OllyDip at the time. And OllyDip and VDip is basically the place that you would go online for a lot of these variants. So my journey was all online pretty much from a lot of this, except for those very, very early days.
What about you, Kaner? Same question.
My father introduced me to the game when I was a teenager, and my first game I ever played was against the Cousins, and I've been hooked really ever since. A few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, when I was living overseas, I was looking for something that was English language that I could do over the internet, and rediscovered the game of diplomacy. It was Dip 2000 back then. It was an email hosted site, and then migrated to WebDip, and then migrated to back then it was OllyDip, and then VDip. So that's my story in a nutshell.
It's not a bad story. Ben, how about you? Give us your origin story and also how you got to be the variant editor for Diplomacy World.
Thanks for having me again. I think our last conversation was about Diplomacy World. That was about, I guess it's 4 years ago now, that chief editor Doug reached out and was looking for volunteers, and variants was kind of an area that I felt an amateur at, but less amateurish than other areas like strategy and tactics. So that's how I got into the editor role in Diplomacy World, and it's been enjoyable exploring variants further. And I think the great thing about being co-editor variants in Diplomacy World is getting to speak with a lot more variant designers and having them ask me to play their games. And I'm actually in one of those right now. That's been a lot of fun.
And Ben, if I remember correctly, you came from up through the PlayDip ranks. Is that right?
Yes, I started playing Diplomacy in high school, and then Play Diplomacy was the site I used. And so I started mainly on Play Diplomacy, but now I mostly stay on email or kind of old school zine play. Or sometimes I get to play in tournaments as well.
Well, that's certainly something dear to my heart. Well, Ben, let me stay with you. What about variants really gets your juices flowing?
My juices get overflowing with variants because Diplomacy is possibly the only game system where you get excited about amateur designs. I mean, I'm sure y'all have experienced that someone comes up to you and say, "Hey, I've designed a game," and you kind of groan inside because you don't know what you're about to experience. But Diplomacy, the game system itself, is amazing because the simultaneous moves allow it to scale from as few players or as many players as you want. And I think Ambi and Ken really seem to like the big variants from what I've seen in their podcasts. And then the negotiation aspect gives designers a little bit more leeway when making variants. That makes them less painful to play if they're poorly designed.
Yeah. Well, Kaner, I think you have designed some variants in your time, as I recall. To tell us about why you did that and what your favorite one is.
I've designed a few variants. I think Ambi's designed more than I have ultimately. I've had a hand. Well, I've designed the Mars variant, Rat Wars, Mongolian, and I had a hand in the K-Octopi variant, all of which are live over at VDip. I think which one am I most proud of those variant creations, and Ambi's going to groan at this because I know it's one of his most hated variants, but I'm most proud of Rat Wars when it comes to variant creation, mostly because it pushes the envelope of what can really be looked at when you look at what goes with the code and what can really do with the rule set. And it's a 4-player version. It's Fog of War, and you play a tribe of rats and you duke it out in a sewage system. I think, though, my largest contribution to the variant world at this point in time is probably the sea lanes concept, where it was designed specifically to address the issue of stalemate lines in ocean territories. What had been happening, or what had been observed after a lot of runs at those larger maps, was that the ocean regions would become clogged up and essentially become, once you get those areas secured, then that's sort of almost the end of the game. So it was really a stab at creating a way to facilitate medium and end game competition without bogging down those ocean regions. I know David E. Cohen has got a different version of the solution to that issue, but I think at this point in time there's about 4 or 5 variants which have implemented that Sea Lanes version, all of which are larger maps. So I think it's not so much a variant in itself that's been made, but it's a variant that has contributed to variant creation.
It's really an innovation. So, I am glad that you did that. I have played before in I can't remember which variant it was that had the sea lanes in it. Amby, let's go over to you. According to Cantor, you've produced some variants. Are you particularly proud of one?
I'm proud of them all, just like all my children.
Right. Now, that's fine, but tell us your favorite.
I guess one thing you need to kind of consider, if you're a diplomacy, enthusiast and you love the game, there's this gradient of how much things vary from the classic game. So, for example, I've created a number of variants where you are aiming to try to, as best as you can, get a bit of a balance, but you're kind of also trying to keep to the fundamental rules. So all that's really changed there is you've replaced Austria with, another different location on a map and a different country name. So from that point of view, some of the things I've done there, like there's American conflict, which is like set during the American Civil War, but with all the European powers getting involved. An alternate history of where the country of Australia never federated and became independent states and independent countries that fight each other. So some of those things are basically exactly like a normal classic game, but with a different map and a different context. Through to variants where you've got actual rule changes that accommodate all sorts of different weird and wonderful things. So one variant I created with a little bit of help from people who have a bit more understanding from the technology was Pirates. So Pirates is basically set up so that it's got all the normal things. It's kind of set in the Caribbean or Caribbean, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But you've got other aspects as well. So your two units, instead of having armies and fleets, they're basically both fleet options. But one is able to attack with double strength and move at a normal pace, and others able to kind of move at double pace but has normal attacking strength. So you have to start kind of factoring some of these rule changes. You have like a random hurricane that's basically almost like an invincible player that you can't beat, that goes around randomly smashing up supply centers and units. That's kind of, I think, for some people who are very purist, a bit too much of an extreme version away from what the game's all about. But I think probably the one variant I'd be proud of the most, which was put together with a number of other people from V Diplomacy, is 1066. So this is just a simple 3-player variant. It's obviously set during that period of conquest of England. And it's basically organised where you've got the English, the Normans, and the Norwegians fighting it out in a bit of a 3-way tussle over England. The advantage with that is also you need to kind of have some slight rule changes in that context, and this is where it kind of gets interesting. So it's got a fog of war concept. So basically you can't see beyond your units or beyond your supply centres. So you may have no idea whatsoever what's going on at the other side of the map. On top of that, to actually win the game, the victory conditions are you need to have at least 2 of the capitals of those 3. So you can't kind of get a majority of supply centres and not get a capital. You have to kind of do that as well. And of course, on top of that, it's a very, very aesthetically pleasing map. So that's one of the things I think is also great if you can achieve there's some fantastic aesthetically beautiful maps out there. And I think that's something that obviously some variant creators try to also achieve as best as they can.
Yeah, when I first started playing variants back in the old days, there was no such thing as aesthetically pleasing variant maps. They were all hand-drawn. Those are the ones we were playing when I started playing games. So what's available now is actually sort of astounding.
Well, that being said, David, I'd say one of the maps I like the most looks very much like a hand-drawn map. So it's called Atlantic Colonies. It was created by, I have to actually check who actually created that particular variant. Safari, yeah, so a player who's well known in that particular space, and it kind of looks like a hand-drawn map, with the sepia tones and all the sorts of other things. So we might want to kind of create a link to it within, your show, or so to speak. But it's a very, very pretty map and looks very much like a hand-drawn map.
Well, that brings me to my next point with you, Amby, which is certainly back when I was doing a lot more variant play, there were map variants, so there were rule variants. There were some that did both, but there was a fairly big dividing line. One of the reasons I really loved map variants is because I'm a history dweeb. So And in fact, I'm a map dweeb as well. So are you, Abby, are you a history nerd, a map nerd? Is that part of what's going on?
Absolutely. So again, take me back to high school. I think as most teenage boys would probably have, a calendar of risque clad people. This was the 80s, so you could get away with doing that. My calendar I had on my wall was classic maps. From Europe and Africa and Asia and the Americas. So very much into that point of view. And yes, I love my history. I think I've subscribed to about a dozen different history podcasts and loved history at school. So if I kind of had my calling again, I probably would have actually become a history professor, which would have been pretty awesome.
Part of that story was awesome, and part of that story was actually rather sad. Amby, I hope you get out more. I hope you get out more now than you did back in the day.
I try, David. I try.
I'm glad to hear.
Kind of helps me at least get a few drinks under my belt whilst we talk diplomacy.
It's good to have friends, get you out of your shell, out of your apparently map centerfold thing you had going on. Ben, let me ask you something. You have been doing a series of articles in Diplomacy World about the worst variant ever, which I've enjoyed. But let's switch this around. I want to know from you, you're the DW editor, what is the best design variant you've seen?
Well, I write about the worst because they're a lot easier to write about than just typing over and over. This one's great. I can't pick one. I have two. The first is one that I personally don't really enjoy playing, but I think it is one of the best designed ones is Cold War. That one's a newer one designed by Firehawk, and I think we've already mentioned Safari. I think that is just a well-designed, really tight map, and it's only 2 players, which is why I don't play it, but I do think it just captures the chess-like mechanics of the basic game really well. And then the one I've run the most in my own zine is 1900, which is basically the original map, and I think why it's such a well-designed map is it takes basically the original locations and makes them all feel fresh somehow. It's very well designed in that regard. And I think as far as a history buff who enjoys maps, that is one of my favorite designed variant maps.
Well, Kenya, if you were looking for, or if you were making a description for what a good variant is, what would those characteristics be from your perspective, Kenya?
I think there's 2 things that really jump to mind when I'm looking at a variant and thinking, is that a good variant? Is that one worth playing? I think probably the first what really jumps to mind is the context. What historical period is it being played in? What, when I'm playing it, what imaginary character am I putting on? Or what hat am I putting on? What a historical thing am I simulating? And at its heart, diplomacy is a simulation of World War One, which is attractive in and of itself. But what happens if you're playing Napoleon, or what happens if you're playing, a breakup of the United States of America? I think that's probably the first thing, is the context. Is there a story that attaches itself to the variant? The second thing that really pops to mind when I'm playing a variant, or if I'm looking to join a game, is there an opportunity to play, regardless of what country I draw, is there an opportunity to play it differently? Is there enough variation within those powers for there to be a unique thing that I can bring to the game? Can I be a pirate? Can I expand in a brute force military way? Is there a combination of the two? What I'm looking for, that uniqueness inside. I think the original game of Diplomacy does that great. You've got that asymmetrical setup of powers on the board, and I think that a really good variant carries that concept across to a new board or rule set.
Can I just jump in there from what Kane has said? I think that was probably one of, and I have been panned about this in the past, I think one of the reasons that I don't necessarily gravitate towards normal classic board game of Diplomacy, because I tend to find that some of the alliance systems are just so stale at times, and what I prefer to look for is something that's actually interesting and engaging and something very, very different, just to kind of create my creative juices going. That being said, it usually ends in an abject failure. I think the well-known one is Germany opening on Russia. But I think that's one thing that Kana mentioned before that's really interesting as well. Even if you are playing, a normal classic board, you can still play it with some your own variant over the top of it. So like we've played games where, I think Kana's mentioned you take on the persona of being, the Austrian Archduke and you kind of go for an extreme element of that. So you play the game normally, but you're kind of injecting your own personality and your own character into it. And I think the other one that we've done, which was a bit of a bizarre one as well, is, Google Translate. So basically you have rules where you have to kind of write your message in English, put it through a number of different translation things, and then send all your communication to other players in this gobbledygook Google Translate version that's gone through about 5 or 6 translations. And that can be a lot of fun when people actually play that type of game. And the other thing that Kane is very heavily involved in and may want to actually touch on as well, and it's been played obviously on a classic map, but I think he tends to find it works better on the 901 known world map, is the concept of what was it called again, Kane? I keep forgetting. It's the finance one. Bourse, yes.
Bourse, yep. Well, in the category of
Bourse on a classic, and it did not work.
In the category of there's nothing new under the sun, what you just said is stuff that was going on in the very early days of the diplomacy hobby. There were a lot of role-playing people in the very early game. In fact, Gary Gygax, one of the inventors, or the inventor of Dungeons and Dragons, came out of the diplomacy hobby. There were people that really got into the role-playing aspect of diplomacy from the very beginning. So, and it's fascinating that there are still people that do that, and sort of people that are rediscovering that potential way to play the game that's fun. I mean, variant doesn't mean weird, it means different. It means looking something from a new perspective. So in that sense, I'm really digging everything that's been said there. And Bourse is another thing that was played in the postal days back in the 70s and 80s in particular. There was a lot of Bourse played, sometimes alongside of big time games that were being played at the same time. So the fact that we're going back and rediscovering things like that is awesome, in addition to innovating and doing new things.
I'll just jump in on the Bourse. I think the variant Bourse is about a game which is played adjacent to the game, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the variant of the Bourse, which we found to be tremendously engaging and exciting and fun to play, was actually, all right, we're going to put all of the players as actual Bourse players inside the game. So it gives another avenue for that negotiation, because they're playing actually 2 games. They're playing the board and they're playing the financial market at the same time. So it from that aspect is a variant of a game played alongside. So anyway, jumping on further.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize when I've been playing Dawn of the Enlightenment with designed by David Cohen, and didn't realize that I've been role playing a lot more in that than in my regular diplomacy games. It's freeing to get into a variant situation and not be so stuck in a more competitive system of openings and alliances.
Ben, who are you playing there?
I got stuck with Spain.
Ah, right. Okay, so you stabbed me a long time ago.
Who are you playing as?
I'm France.
Well, that's what we're here to do, is to bring people together here on Dead Live.
I'm
glad we were able to have that little moment.
Unfortunately, I think he might survive to the end of the game, because I think we're in a no move receive death spiral, which is a big.
And I suppose that can be some of the problems also with some types of games. For example, this postal game is an example, is that the turn periods are so long, and once you start factoring in, for example, obviously if you play a normal face-to-face game of diplomacy, it's 4 or 5 hours, or a virtual game, as opposed to, say, what we're doing with Dawn of the Enlightenment, which I think started, I don't know, 4 months ago probably, or maybe longer, and just real life stuff gets in the way, people drop out, and that kind of can impact the rhythm of a game, which obviously is a bad side of things compared to like a normal, real-time classic game.
Yeah, and variant games having so many more players, sometimes, I'm obviously just sometimes, but those big monster variants, it is hard to keep everybody going and without a bunch of NMRs and rule and player changes. Kane, I'm going to give the floor back to you for your final thoughts about the current state of the variant hobby in diplomacy.
Well, David, I think it's strong. I think if you start from the position of if you take full press or gunboat games or even bot games as a variant of diplomacy, I think it's still heavily it's massive. There's lots and lots of games out there being played with those variations on just the classic board alone. If you jump to any of the big variant sites that are out there, you'll easily find games and players willing to play your variant that you want to play. Whether that's on VDIP or PlayDip. WebDip offers like 7 or 8 variants. Diplomatic Corp do by email, and they've got a massive list of variants available for players to play. If you crunch the numbers on VDIP, which is probably the largest variant site on the net at the moment, the big two that players play are Fog of War and Gunboat. Those are the two massive variants that by numbers alone people are interested in playing, which by their nature are really difficult to play face to face. So I can understand that jump. At the moment, there's variants being made by some well-known variant creators and being tested. I think the variant space is healthy, and that there's probably ways where we could support it to become a bit more mainstream if we wanted it to. However, at this point in time, I think it's got a lot of life left in it.
Yeah, we should also mention I've played variants both on Conspiracy and Duplicity, both Android apps that have significant variant capabilities. Amy, let me switch over to you. There are some what I would call straight diplomacy players out there watching this stream who've never tried variants. Tell them why they should take a walk on the wild side.
That's a good question, David. I think just it's worth putting your toe in the water at least, just to give it a go. If it doesn't appeal to you, then that's fine. You don't have to play it ever again. But I think the main thing would be to kind of channel what interests you most about the game, what aspects of the game that you actually really, appeal to you, and then to amplify that accordingly with a variant that supports that. So, if you're really into, you like the World War I creation of all that stuff, well, great. Go find something else that kind of creates this alternative version of history, or alternatively look at it, something else that's historical. If you kind of like thinking all around the balance, then maybe it's a case of looking for a game like that. I do apologize. There's some background noise here at the moment. So yeah, that's that in a nutshell.
I appreciate that. Ben, I'm going to give the last word to you, and you can either tell us about a variant that you're playing, tell us about a tournament you're fixing to go to, or tell us about a bad guy you've put away because you're a prosecutor, whatever you want to say.
Well, we did just put a murderer away, so that's always good. But more exciting than that is that I will be going to Dipcon, should the stars align. But
that is exciting.
The wife's already given the thumbs up, so I'll be heading that way, and I'm excited.
That is great. That's just about a month and a half from now, and I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Well, guys, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for talking up some variant action for our viewers, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.